Good evening from the News Radio, 1120 and 93.7 FM, KPNW Studios. I am Bill Lundun, and I do the wake-up call 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Friday mornings here on KPNW, streaming worldwide at kpnw.com. And tonight's news is brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland, where aliens gave him technology, laser technology, where they can use that to clean your teeth. And he only uses American-made crowns, which is pretty cool. And I'm going to be getting one in a couple of months. All right, here's a look at some of the weird news that we're following for Oregon, or as we like to call Oregon, 98,352 square miles surrounded by reality. You know, we might want to think that because we've got Washington to the north and California to the south. We'll get back to you. All right, here's some of the stories. Well, a record 7,648 students graduated from Oregon State University during its university-wide commencement over the weekend at Research Stadium, and there were 4,100 students plus that participated in the actual ceremony that honored the university's 155th class, and that means that in its 155 years, Oregon State has given out 295,283 degrees during that university's history. Then the University of Oregon held its commencement ceremonies on Monday with about 4,700 students walking the stage, receiving their diplomas in the 147th commencement at the U of O. Of course, it wouldn't be Eugene, and it definitely wouldn't be the U of O without some AstroTurf drama to liven up the ceremonies with bad street theatrics. A group of anti-Israel and pro-Palestinians/Hamas protesters popped out of the seats to start chanting their slogans and waving Palestinian flags. They began their tantrum as U of O President John Scholes began his commencement address. Then finally, after making noise and spectacle, the group of what was estimated to be about 2 to 3 dozen turned their back on U of O President Scholes and walked out of the stadium. The group was met with groans, boos, and a few cheers. Scholes, to his credit, didn't stop his speech while all this was going on. What was fun, though, was that later the group tried to get in so they could get their diplomas, and they weren't allowed re-entry. So sad. Well, walking across the stage is pretty important to high schoolers, like Angel Lopez Lane, who just graduated from Reynolds High School near Portland. Now, he has decided to enlist in the Marines. And because of that, he was pretty excited to wear his stole for the ceremony. It's kind of like a sash. But just minutes before he was going to walk on stage, the Reynolds staff told him it's not allowed and to take the stole off and put it in a bag. So Angel immediately texted his mom, who is fuming at the school's decision. Amber Lane says, "This is not okay. There are several kids in the class who've signed up to give their lives to the military. The families and the kids deserve to be able to be honored, appreciated, show what they've done." So Reynolds School District responded in part, quote, "Reynolds High School doesn't allow any post-high school stoles, including military and college stoles at graduation. We do allow students to have cultural stoles at graduation, like maybe Palestinian flags. And the reason for the ban? School doesn't have one. They literally said, we don't know." Nice. All right, only in Oregon. The Oregon Medical Board. Now, these are the people that allow doctors to have their licenses and maintain their licenses to practice medicine in Oregon. And they are considering disciplining doctors for using microaggressions and to make reporting microaggressions mandatory for all doctors. Now, under the proposed new ethics rule from the Oregon Medical Board, unprofessional conduct will also include microaggressions. The new Section J ranks microaggressions along with fraud, sexual assault, and ordering unnecessary or harmful surgeries. I'm not kidding. Microaggressions include phrases like melting pot and pulling oneself up by your own bootstraps, which, according to some, and we'll tell you the source, some consider those phrases racist. Now, those have been identified by Columbia professor Darrell Wing Sue, and he is cited by Oregon state government as, and I'm not kidding, quote, a microaggressions expert. There's apparently a teaching job for anybody with a batshit idea. According to the proposed rule, quote, in the practice of medicine, podiatry, or acupuncture, discrimination through unfair treatment characterized by implicit or explicit bias, including microaggressions or indirect or subtle behaviors that reflect negative attitudes or beliefs about a non-majority group. Under Oregon law, then, it would mean that doctors who fail to report things like microaggressions from themselves, yes, or a colleague within 10 business days can lose their license. Now, the state's medical board is in the process of shoehorning microaggressions, which are also known as innocently intentioned behaviors interpreted by women or minorities to be subliminal communications of bias, into its definition of unprofessional conduct. According to the proposed rule, which the board unveiled back in April, Oregon Medical Board policy analyst Elizabeth Roth said the board will consider permanently adopting the proposed microaggression rule during their July 11th meeting. The proposal says that rule, quote, may favorably impact racial equity by making discrimination a ground for discipline by OMB licensees, and could prompt, quote, additional board investigations given the creation of a, quote, new ground for unprofessional conduct, meaning microaggressions. It's unclear exactly how the board would define a microaggression or review a microaggression complaint. The proposed rule doesn't provide any examples, although Oregon's government does have some. And they previously have pointed to examples of microaggressions in its 2021 DEI action plan. For example, the Department of Administrative Services said, posing the question, how did you get your job, to a minority constitutes racial microaggression, as defined by our friend Columbia professor Darrell Wing Sue. Okay, following up on a story that we've been telling you about over the course of a couple of weeks, and it has to do with, yes, the Portland School District Teachers Association. So after the Teachers Union for Portland Public Schools promoted lesson plans encouraging students to pray for Allah for the plight of Palestinians and describing Israelis as, quote, Zionist bullies who stole Palestinian land and praising Hamas as being freedom fighters, the union now says, after a vote by their board, they've decided to remove the links to the controversial teaching materials from its website, with no stated plans to repost them, with a caveat. So the links to the lesson plans, the videos, and other teaching materials, and to an advocacy guide entitled "Know Your Rights!" Teaching and instructing for Palestine within Portland Public Schools. All of those things disappeared from the union's website over the weekend. Now, in its letter, a newsletter, the union sent out, it said, its leadership voted to remove the links to the lesson plans, videos, and the like, and to temporarily remove and revise the whole Know Your Rights guide with a plan to repost an updated guide at a later date. All the newsletter gave as an explanation for why they did that was because it was in response to feedback from teachers. All right, here's what happened. The move happened after a group of teachers, and apparently quite a few of them throughout the district, started circulating flyers calling for a recall and vote of no confidence in the union leadership. In other words, yeah, it was more than just feedback. The effort was driven by frustrations over the November teachers' strike, as well as the leaders' push to, support Palestinians and demonize Israelis. The flyers stated that leadership should focus on, quote, our workplace issues, including pay, smaller class sizes, and crumbling infrastructure. Oh, in other words, things that actually have to do with teaching. Also, there had been complaints about the union to the Oregon Department of Justice's bias response hotline, coming from, oddly enough, parents, community members, Jewish organizations, Jewish teachers, and Jewish students within the school district. Oh, that might make things kind of bad. So wildfire danger is expected to be below average for Oregon this year, although some pockets could be at higher risk. A big part of the improved outlook comes down to a new El Nino weather pattern that began in the fall, which allowed the state to build up a decently sized mountain snowpack for a second year in a row, plus late spring snow on the mountains and record-breaking rainfall earlier this month, which pretty much stamped out drought conditions all around the state. Fire meteorologist John Bonk with the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center says that he believes Washington is a little more likely to be fire active than Oregon because they had less snowpack and rainfall overall. But that said, he still expects Washington and, in particular, Oregon to be below the average fire danger. So auditors from Oregon's Secretary of State's office were unable to complete a review of Oregon's new $21 million payroll and human services system that plagued thousands of state workers with inaccurate paychecks in 2023. We told you about that a few months ago. Now, that finding is contained within the Secretary of State's statewide single audit that looks at a variety of state government agencies and programs and how they work. Well, the Oregon Department of Administrative Services implemented the brand new payroll system called Workday at the end of December of 2022 for around 44,000 total state government employees. And immediately, thousands of state workers started experiencing problems with their paychecks. Some didn't receive their full pay or checks at all and ended up having to go to food banks, use credit cards, or borrow money just to be able to pay rent or their mortgages and or food. Others received paper checks instead of the direct deposits and ended up having to float bills with credit cards while they waited for their checks to clear. Some employees were overpaid by a huge amount and ended up having large sums subtracted from their future checks without any notice whatsoever. Some of them found out, oh, surprise, you don't have insurance anymore. Oops. Others found out that their PERS benefits weren't being paid into and a variety of other problems like screwed up vacation and sick leave, and you get the idea. And those problems continued, not just in January of 2023, but for quite a while. What does quite a while mean? Well, we'll get to that. So here we are, over a year later in 2024, and state auditors say they have struggled to get full and complete information from the Department of Administrative Services, which actually prevented them from fully assessing the system so they could do an audit, which they're supposed to do. Auditors say the Department of Administrative Services refused to give access to the key documentation system and provide timely responses to audit requests. Auditors say they received incomplete and outdated records when they requested the documentation that would demonstrate the agency's due diligence when planning a project of that size. In other instances, auditors say they faced long waits for information, like, for instance, the number of employees impacted and the total dollar amount of overpayments and underpayments, and how long the problems lasted. Auditors wrote the, quote, information was not readily available to provide to auditors, indicating a lack of organization expected of a project of this magnitude. Now, based on the available data, auditors say that a lack of adequate testing to flag the problems, never happened before it was rolled out. And they estimate that well over 10% of state employees dealt with problems with their paychecks, at least. So how is the agency, the Oregon Department of Administrative Services, responding to this? This is what they said. Now, mind you, this report was just released about a week ago. And Administrative Services said, quote, efforts remain underway and significant progress has been made to track and resolve the issue. Okay, efforts remain underway and progress has been made to resolve the issues, which, if you parse that and speak simple English, it sounds like they're still having problems. And once again, on Oregon's checklist of things to fail at, IT failure, check mark, big old check mark. Congratulations, Oregon. You let us down again. We knew you could do it. All right, this look at the news brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland. He's from Chris Dental. Go see him. He's a pretty cool dude. And now it is time for Rick to roll out a barrel of real. Maybe even ladle some out in a giant cup. Go for it, Rick.